The people you ignore in the light are often the ones who save you in the dark. Orbital Nexus Station stretched nearly 4 miles across the vacuum of space, a rotating city of steel, glass, and artificial sunlight suspended above the blue curve of a distant world. During normal operations, its corridors never truly slept. Freight crews moved cargo. Engineers monitored reactors. Traders crossed sectors carrying goods from 100 civilizations. But tonight was different. A violent energy storm rolled through the region, hammering the station with waves of electromagnetic interference. Emergency lights flickered. Entire sections lost power. Warning tones echoed through maintenance channels. Mason Reed tightened his grip on a flashlight and stepped into Corridor C-19, one of the oldest parts of the station. The passageway had been abandoned years earlier except for occasional maintenance inspections. Darkness filled the corridor beyond the narrow beam of light. The air felt colder here, quieter. The distant hum of station machinery sounded strangely weak. Mason checked the diagnostic display attached to his wrist. Power fluctuations continued spreading through multiple sectors. "Just find the damaged relay," he muttered. "Fix it. Go home." The flashlight swept across pipes, conduits, and aging bulkheads. Then the beam stopped. Someone was sitting against the wall. Mason froze. The figure remained motionless in the darkness. For a brief second, he wondered if it was a maintenance mannequin left behind decades ago. Then the figure moved slightly. A woman. Not human. Alien. Silver hair partially covered her face. Dark clothing blended into the shadows. One arm rested against the wall while she sat with her head lowered. "Hey," Mason called cautiously. "You okay?" No response. He moved closer. The woman slowly looked up. Violet eyes reflected the flashlight beam. Her sapphire blue skin appeared unusually pale beneath the emergency lighting. She looked exhausted. Not injured. Not frightened. Just completely drained. Mason had seen that look before. Engineers after double shifts. Medical staff during emergencies. People who had simply reached their limit. "Bad night?" he asked. The alien woman stared at him for several seconds, as if surprised by the question itself. Finally, she nodded once. Something like that. Her voice sounded calm but distant. Mason lowered the flashlight so it would not shine directly into her eyes. "Power outage caught you out here?" Another pause. "Yes." The answer seemed technically correct without revealing much. Mason sat down on an equipment crate several feet away. Most people avoided making strangers uncomfortable during emergencies. He understood that. Silence settled between them. Red emergency lights painted long shadows across the corridor. Somewhere far away, a warning siren sounded and then faded. After a minute, Mason reached into his utility bag and pulled out a sealed bottle of water. It was the last one he had brought for the shift. He rolled it across the floor toward her. "Take it." The woman glanced down at the bottle. "What about you?" Mason shrugged. "There is a vending station 2 levels up." There was not. The nearest functioning machine was almost half a mile away. The alien studied him carefully. Then she accepted the bottle. "Thank you." Mason smiled lightly. "You are welcome." For reasons he could not explain, the atmosphere changed. The corridor no longer felt quite so cold. Outside the station, the storm continued raging across the stars. Inside the darkness of Corridor C-19, a maintenance technician and a mysterious stranger sat quietly beneath flickering emergency lights. Neither realized that this simple moment would soon become one of the most talked about stories in the history of Orbital Nexus. The storm continued for another 3 hours. Waves of interference rolled across Orbital Nexus, causing lights to flicker and systems to reset unexpectedly. Mason eventually remembered why he had entered Corridor C-19 in the first place. The damaged relay still needed repairs. "I should probably get back to work," he said, standing from the equipment crate. The alien woman glanced toward him. "You stayed longer than necessary." Mason shrugged. "You looked like you needed company more than the relay needed fixing." For a moment, something unreadable crossed her face. Surprise perhaps, or disbelief. Then it vanished. Mason picked up his toolbox and flashlight. Before leaving, he paused. "You should not sit in the dark forever." A faint smile appeared at the corner of her lips. "That sounds like advice." "It is." He pointed toward the brighter sections of the station. "There is an observation deck 2 levels above this sector. Best view on Nexus." "You go there often?" Whenever I need to remember that my problems are smaller than an entire planet. The woman actually laughed. Softly, briefly, yet it transformed the atmosphere around her. Perhaps I will visit it. Good. Mason nodded and disappeared deeper into the corridor. He never noticed that she continued watching him long after he left. The following morning, Orbital Nexus returned to normal operations. Cargo routes reopened. Civilian traffic resumed. Emergency alerts disappeared from public displays. For most residents, the storm quickly became yesterday's problem. For Mason, life returned to its usual routine. Repair requests, maintenance inspections, equipment diagnostics. By late afternoon, he found himself replacing environmental filters near the central promenade, one of the busiest areas on the station. Hundreds of travelers moved beneath massive glass ceilings. Artificial sunlight filled the space. Restaurants and shops lined both sides of the corridor. Mason was balancing on a maintenance ladder when he noticed a familiar figure standing near one of the observation windows. Silver hair, sapphire blue skin, dark clothing. The same woman from corridor C-19. She stood silently watching the stars beyond the glass. Mason climbed down from the ladder and walked over. You found the observation deck. The woman turned. Genuine surprise appeared in her violet eyes. You remembered me. Of course. Mason frowned slightly. Was I supposed to forget? She seemed oddly amused by the question. Many people do. Mason glanced toward the stars outside the window. Well, I am not many people. The woman studied him carefully. Clearly, they stood beside the glass in comfortable silence. Far below, the blue planet rotated slowly beneath scattered clouds. Freight vessels drifted through distant docking lanes. After a minute, Mason handed her a small paper bag. What is this? She asked. Food. Why? Mason looked genuinely confused. Because you skipped dinner yesterday. Her eyes widened slightly. Somehow he had noticed. You remembered that too? You looked exhausted. He smiled lightly. Exhausted people should eat. For several seconds, she simply stared at the bag in her hands. No one had ever spoken to her this way. Not with fear. Not with admiration. Not with expectation. Just simple concern. And for reasons she could not yet explain, that felt more valuable than any honor she had ever received. Over the next several days, something unusual began happening. Mason started seeing the mysterious alien woman everywhere. Not constantly, just enough to notice. Sometimes she appeared near the observation deck during his lunch break. Other times, she stood quietly along the upper promenades overlooking the docking bays. Once he spotted her in a station garden filled with bioluminescent plants imported from 3 different star systems. Each encounter felt accidental, yet somehow they kept happening. On the 4th day, Mason found her seated beside a panoramic window, watching a convoy of cargo ships depart the station. Artificial sunlight spilled across the polished floor. Beyond the glass, stars stretched endlessly in every direction. You know, Mason said as he approached. At this point, I am beginning to suspect you actually live here. The woman glanced toward him. That would be a reasonable assumption. Good. He sat on a nearby bench. I was worried I was becoming a terrible detective. Another faint smile appeared. She seemed to smile more often now. Not dramatically, just enough to soften the distance that always lingered behind her eyes. For several minutes, they watched the departing ships together. Then Mason noticed something strange. How did you know docking ring 7 reopened this morning? The woman tilted her head slightly. What do you mean? The maintenance crews only finished repairs 2 hours ago. Mason frowned. Even most station employees do not know that yet. For the briefest moment, surprise crossed her face. Then it disappeared. I hear things. Mason laughed. That is a suspicious answer. Perhaps. Her tone carried amusement. Mason let the mystery go. Everyone on a station this large had secrets. His mostly involved forgotten maintenance schedules and misplaced repair tools. Whatever hers were, they clearly mattered more. Later that afternoon, they crossed paths again near a crowded transit corridor. A service robot had stalled in the middle of pedestrian traffic, creating a growing bottleneck of frustrated travelers. Before station staff could arrive, Mason knelt beside the machine and began diagnosing the problem. The alien woman watched from several feet away. Within minutes, the robot was functioning again. The crowd continued moving. Nobody stopped to thank him. Nobody even seemed to notice. Mason simply stood, wiped his hands on a cloth, and continued walking. You could have left that for maintenance services. she said as she caught up to him. I am maintenance services. It was not your assignment. It was blocking the hallway. She looked genuinely confused. That was enough reason? Mason blinked. Should there be another reason? The question followed her for the rest of the evening. Because where she came from, actions usually carried purpose. Rank, strategy, benefit. Everything existed for a reason larger than itself. Yet Mason seemed to operate according to an entirely different set of rules. He helped because someone needed help, fixed problems because they were there, offered kindness because it cost him almost nothing. That night, standing alone near the observation deck after Mason had gone home, the alien woman stared out at the stars. Below her, orbital nexus continued its endless rotation through space. Around her, thousands of people hurried through their lives. And for the first time in a very long time, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow. The first real clue appeared 6 days after the storm. Mason was working inside a maintenance hub near the station's central reactor network when an unusual alert appeared on his terminal. It was gone almost immediately. Less than a second. A secure system override. The kind of authorization most station employees never saw. Mason frowned. That is strange. He tapped a few keys. Access denied. Whatever had triggered the alert belonged far above his clearance level. He forgot about it within minutes. Unfortunately, the same thing happened again later that afternoon, and again the following day. Each time, the override appeared only briefly. Each time it originated from a different sector of orbital nexus. And somehow, every incident occurred shortly before he happened to run into the mysterious alien woman. The pattern bothered him more than he wanted to admit. 3 days later, they met near one of the upper observation rings. Artificial daylight streamed through enormous transparent panels overhead. Cargo vessels drifted through docking lanes beyond the station. Mason handed her a cup of coffee. By now she accepted them without protest. You seem distracted, she observed. Mason laughed softly. Am I that obvious? Very. He stared out at the stars. Something weird keeps happening with the station systems. Her expression remained neutral. Weird how? Restricted access events. He shrugged. Probably nothing. The woman tilted her head slightly. Yet you are thinking about it. I repair broken equipment for a living. Mason smiled. Being suspicious of strange system behavior is part of the job description. For a moment she seemed amused. A useful habit. Then a voice suddenly echoed through the observation ring. Clear the corridor. Several civilians immediately stepped aside. 2 uniformed security officers emerged from a nearby transit passage. Their posture was rigid, professional, alert. Mason expected them to continue past. Instead, both officers stopped the moment they noticed the alien woman. Something unexpected happened. They straightened instantly. Not casually, not politely, formally, almost like a military salute. Then they continued walking without a word. Mason stared after them. That was strange. The woman calmly sipped her coffee. Perhaps they recognized me. You must be more important than you pretend. Her violet eyes shifted toward him. What makes you think I am pretending? Mason pointed toward the corridor where the officers had disappeared. That. For several seconds neither spoke. Then she smiled faintly. Maybe you are finally becoming a good detective. The answer raised more questions than it solved. Later that evening, Mason found himself thinking about the encounter while repairing environmental sensors near docking ring 4. The pieces no longer fit together. The mysterious knowledge, the security clearances, the officer's reaction, the way she seemed comfortable in every sector of the station, even restricted areas. None of it matched the image of an ordinary officer. Yet every time he considered asking directly, something stopped him. Maybe because she clearly valued her privacy. Maybe because she never treated him differently. Or maybe because their friendship had become one of the most unexpectedly pleasant parts of his week. Across the station, the alien woman stood alone inside a private observation chamber overlooking the stars. Below her, thousands of lights illuminated orbital nexus. Her reflection stared back from the glass. Behind her, a secure communicator activated silently. A message appeared. Priority Alpha. Immediate response required. She read the notification once, then slowly closed her eyes. The peaceful days were ending, and soon, whether she wanted it or not, Mason Reed was going to learn exactly who she was. The station changed the next morning. At first, the difference was subtle. A few extra security officers appeared in major transit corridors. Cargo inspections took longer than usual. Access checkpoints quietly increased verification procedures. Most residents barely noticed. Orbital Nexus was enormous. Small disruptions happened every day. Mason only paid attention because maintenance teams received an unusual advisory requesting readiness across all sectors. That cannot be good, one technician muttered while reading the report. Mason agreed. The notice contained very little information, just enough to suggest that something important was happening behind the scenes. By late afternoon, he found himself replacing power regulators near the civilian marketplace. The area buzzed with activity. Vendors sold food from dozens of worlds. Travelers hurried between terminals. Artificial sunlight reflected from polished floors. Everything appeared normal, yet the tension remained, like the station was holding its breath. Mason eventually spotted the alien woman near a balcony overlooking the central concourse. She seemed quieter than usual, more distant. He walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You have that look again." She accepted the cup and raised an eyebrow. "What look?" "The one that says you are thinking about 12 complicated things at the same time." To his surprise, she laughed softly. "Only 12. Sorry." Mason nodded. "I underestimated you." For a brief moment, the familiar warmth returned. Then her gaze drifted toward the crowded station below. Hundreds of civilians moved through the concourse unaware of anything unusual. "Do you ever wonder how many lives cross paths without realizing it?" she asked. Mason considered the question. "Every day." And he shrugged. "I think most people matter more than they realize." The answer seemed to affect her more than expected. She stared into her coffee for several seconds. "That sounds like something a philosopher would say. Good thing I fix air filtration systems." Another smile appeared, smaller this time, sadder. The silence that followed felt different. He noticed it immediately. Something was wrong. Not dangerous, not urgent, just heavy. "You are leaving, are you?" Mason asked quietly. The woman looked surprised. "Why would you think that?" "Because every goodbye starts sounding like philosophy." She stared at him for a long moment, then looked away. That alone told him enough. The station lights gradually shifted toward evening settings. Outside the observation windows, stars emerged against the darkness. "I might be gone for a little while," she admitted. Mason nodded slowly. "Work?" "Something like that." He did not press further. If she wanted him to know more, she would tell him. That had always been their unspoken agreement. Instead, he reached into his utility bag and removed a small object. A maintenance access token. Old, worn smooth from years of use. "What is this?" she asked. "My lucky token." Maintenance technicians have lucky tokens? The smart ones do. He placed it in her hand. "Bring it back when you return." Her violet eyes widened slightly. "You assume I am coming back." Mason smiled. "Of course you are." The confidence in his voice caught her completely off guard. For weeks, she had lived between secrets, responsibilities, and expectations. Yet somehow this ordinary human spoke as though her return was the simplest fact in the universe. She closed her fingers around the token. "I will bring it back." Neither realized it then, but those would be the last words they exchanged before the entire station learned the truth about who she really was. 3 days passed without a single sign of her. For Mason, the absence felt strange in ways he could not easily explain. Orbital Nexus continued operating as it always had. Freight arrived. Travelers departed. Maintenance requests multiplied with impressive determination. Yet every time he visited the observation deck, every time he crossed the central concourse, some part of him expected to see silver hair beside a window overlooking the stars. Instead, there was only empty space. On the 4th day, the station alarms activated. Not emergency alarms. Information alerts. Every public display across Orbital Nexus shifted simultaneously. Conversations stopped. Travelers paused mid-step. Store owners turned toward the nearest screen. Mason looked up from a maintenance panel as a station-wide announcement appeared above him. "Attention, all residents. Operational status level Alpha has been lifted. Commander Naira Voss has successfully completed mission objectives." The name meant nothing to him. At first. Then the image appeared. Mason froze. The woman from Corridor C-19 looked back from the screen. Her silver hair was pulled back with military precision. Dark armor covered her shoulders. Medals and insignia lined her uniform. The expression he knew so well remained unchanged. Calm, controlled, confident. But everything around her had transformed. Hundreds of personnel stood behind her. Senior officers, security commanders, diplomatic representatives. The entire station seemed focused on a single individual. Mason stared at the display. No way. Around him, reactions exploded instantly. Commander Voss? Someone whispered. The Commander Voss? Another person replied. She just returned. A cargo supervisor nearby looked genuinely amazed. I thought she was off-world. Mason slowly stood. The name spread through the corridor like electricity. Everyone seemed to know who she was. Everyone except him. Within minutes, every network on the station carried stories about her achievements. Strategic operations, rescue missions, diplomatic interventions, years of service across multiple systems, decorations, honors, recognition from worlds Mason had never even heard of. The list felt endless. He sat heavily on a nearby equipment case while watching the reports. You have got to be kidding me. Suddenly dozens of strange moments made sense. The security clearances, the officers who had straightened when they saw her, the restricted system overrides, the way she seemed to know things before anyone else. Mason rubbed his forehead and laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. For weeks, he had shared coffee with one of the most respected figures on the station without having the slightest idea who she was. Meanwhile, high above the civilian sectors, a transport vessel settled into a secured docking bay. Elite security teams assembled in formation. Officers lined the platform. Senior officials waited beside the arrival corridor. The station's most celebrated warriors stepped from the vessel. Commander Naira Voss acknowledged the formal reception with a simple nod. Yet while others discussed mission reports and operational briefings, her attention drifted elsewhere. Hidden inside one of her uniform pockets was a worn maintenance token, a small object with almost no value, except to her. As the welcoming ceremony continued, Naira quietly closed her hand around it. Because despite everything that had happened over the last few days, there was only one reaction she truly cared about. And somewhere deep inside Orbital Nexus, a maintenance technician was still trying to process the fact that his mysterious friend had never been an ordinary officer at all. The next morning, Orbital Nexus seemed obsessed with a single topic. Everywhere Mason went, people talked about Commander Naira Voss. Her image appeared on information screens. News reports replayed highlights from her recent mission. Security personnel spoke about her with admiration. Civilians spoke about her with awe. Some described her as a strategic genius. Others called her the protector of the station. A few simply referred to her as a legend. Mason spent most of the morning pretending he was not listening. It did not work. By lunchtime, he had learned more about Naira Voss than he had intended. None of it sounded remotely compatible with the woman who accepted vending machine coffee and sat quietly beside observation windows. You look distracted. Mason glanced up from his meal. Another technician sat across from him. Long day. You are thinking about Commander Voss, aren't you? Mason nearly choked on his drink. Why would you think that? Because everyone is thinking about Commander Voss. The technician laughed. Half the station is hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Mason looked away. If only they knew. Later that afternoon, a maintenance assignment brought him near one of the executive sectors. Normally, he never worked in this part of Nexus. The corridors were cleaner, quieter, more elegant. Security officers stood at regular intervals. Everything felt designed to remind visitors that important people occupied these levels. Mason was replacing a malfunctioning environmental sensor when he heard approaching footsteps. Several officers entered the corridor. They moved with practiced precision. Behind them walked Naira. For a moment, Mason almost failed to recognize her. The dark armor from the broadcasts reflected soft overhead lighting. Silver insignia marked her rank. Every officer nearby immediately straightened as she passed. Yet despite the formal setting, her attention shifted the instant she saw him. The serious expression disappeared. A small smile replaced it. Mason. The officers exchanged confused glances. Apparently, very few people addressed Commander Voss by her first name. Mason stared at her. You could have mentioned this. Naira stopped. Mentioned what? He gestured broadly toward the uniform, the security detail, and the entire executive sector. Any of this? Her smile widened slightly. You never asked. Mason opened his mouth, then closed it again. Unfortunately, she was correct. That feels like a technical victory. The best kind. Several security officers looked increasingly uncomfortable. Their commander was having a casual conversation with a maintenance technician. The situation appeared to violate several unwritten rules of the universe. Naira noticed their reactions immediately. "Give us a moment," she said. Without hesitation, the officers stepped back. The corridor became quiet. Mason studied her for a second. "So you are really the most important officer on the station?" "One of them. And everybody knows who you are?" "Mostly." He shook his head slowly. "I gave you marketplace coffee." "You did. Twice." "3 times." Mason groaned. Naira laughed softly. The sound echoed gently through the corridor. For the first time since learning the truth, some of the awkwardness began to disappear. Because beneath the uniform, beneath the reputation, beneath all the stories and titles, she still looked exactly the same. Then Naira reached into a pocket and removed a small object. Mason immediately recognized it. His maintenance token. "I told you I would bring it back." She placed it in his hand. Around them, officers and staff watched in complete confusion. None of them understood why one of the station's greatest heroes seemed to value a worn maintenance token so highly. But Naira understood. Because to her, it represented something far rarer than status. It represented trust. And soon, the entire station was about to learn why. 2 days later, every resident of Orbital Nexus received the same notification. Attendance requested. Central Assembly Hall. Special recognition ceremony. The message spread across the station instantly. People speculated for hours. Most assumed the event would honor Commander Naira Voss for her recent mission. Nobody questioned that assumption. After all, she was the station's most celebrated officer. If anyone deserved a ceremony, it was her. Mason arrived only because attendance was strongly encouraged by station administration. He wore his cleanest maintenance jacket and immediately regretted it. The assembly hall was enormous. Thousands of seats surrounded a central platform illuminated by soft white light. Representatives from dozens of species filled the audience. Security officers lined the perimeter. Large holographic displays floated overhead. Everything felt far more formal than Mason preferred. He quietly found a seat near the back. A few minutes later, the lights dimmed. The crowd fell silent. Commander Naira Voss entered from the eastern platform. Instantly, the entire hall stood. Applause echoed through the chamber. Some spectators cheered openly. Others simply watched with admiration. Naira acknowledged them with a respectful nod before stepping into the center of the stage. Her ceremonial uniform reflected the overhead lights. Medals shimmered along one shoulder. Yet despite the grandeur surrounding her, Mason noticed something familiar. She looked uncomfortable with the attention. The realization made him smile. Some things apparently never changed. The station director began speaking. He reviewed Naira's accomplishments. Years of service. Successful operations. Countless lives protected. Every achievement drew additional applause. Mason found himself applauding too. Not because she was famous, because he now understood how much responsibility she carried every day. Eventually, the director stepped aside. "Commander Voss has requested to address the station personally." The audience immediately quieted. Naira moved toward the center of the platform. For several seconds, she simply looked across the crowd. Thousands of faces stared back. Then she spoke. "Everyone here knows my reputation." Her voice carried effortlessly through the hall. "Most of you know my service record." A holographic display appeared above the stage, showing highlights from her career. "You know the missions, the awards, the titles." She paused. "Today I would like to discuss something else." The displays vanished. Confusion spread through the audience. This was not the speech people expected. Naira continued. "Several weeks ago, an energy storm struck Orbital Nexus. A new image appeared. Corridor C-19. Flickering emergency lights. An abandoned maintenance sector." Mason immediately sat upright. "During that storm," she said, "I found myself sitting alone in the dark." The audience watched silently. Another image appeared. A maintenance technician entering the corridor carrying a flashlight and toolbox. Mason felt his stomach drop. "Most people assume courage is revealed during great moments," Naira said. "I disagree." The image showed a human offering a bottle of water. Character reveals itself in small moments. The hall became completely silent. Thousands of eyes followed the recording. A maintenance technician sat beside a stranger. Naira's voice softened slightly. He offered help without knowing who she was. Another image appeared. Coffee shared beside observation windows. Conversations overlooking the stars. A worn maintenance token resting in an open hand. Mason stared at the stage in complete disbelief. Around him, people began turning, looking, searching, trying to identify the person in the recordings. Naira smiled gently. Then she looked directly toward the back rows where Mason sat frozen in his seat. "And today," she said, "I would like the station to meet the person I respect most." For a moment, the entire assembly hall seemed frozen in time. Thousands of people followed Commander Naira Voss's gaze toward the back rows. Mason immediately looked behind himself, then to his left, then to his right. Surely she was talking about someone else. Unfortunately, there was no one else. Naira's smile widened slightly. "Mason Reed," she said. Every screen in the hall displayed his name. A collective murmur swept through the audience. Mason considered several options. None of them seemed particularly useful. Slowly, and with all the enthusiasm of a man approaching an unexpected maintenance emergency, he stood. The crowd parted as station attendants guided him toward the stage. Every step felt unreal. Thousands of eyes followed him. Officers whispered to one another. Civilians stared openly. Even the station director looked surprised. Mason finally reached the central platform and stopped beside Naira. "You could have warned me," he whispered. "You would have avoided coming." "That is a fair point." The audience laughed softly. Somehow that made the situation even more embarrassing. Naira turned toward the crowd. "Many of you know me as a commander." The hall immediately grew quiet again. "You know my rank, my accomplishments, my service history." She paused briefly, but none of those things mattered to him. A holographic image appeared overhead. Corridor C-19. Flickering emergency lights. A lonely section of station hidden from public view. "When we first met, he did not know who I was." Another image appeared. A bottle of water rolling across the floor. He saw someone having a difficult day. The audience remained silent. And that was enough. Naira looked toward Mason. Her violet eyes reflected the soft light of the chamber. "Across my career, I have received medals from governments, honors from admirals, recognition from leaders, and praise from people whose names fill history books." She folded her hands behind her back. "Yet none of those things taught me more about character than a maintenance technician sitting beside a stranger in the dark." The silence inside the hall deepened. Not uncomfortable, meaningful. The kind that appears when people realize they are hearing something true. Naira reached into her uniform pocket and removed the worn maintenance token. The same token Mason had given her days earlier. It looked almost insignificant beneath the bright ceremonial lights. "Most valuable objects are not valuable because of what they are," she said. "They are valuable because of what they represent." She held up the token. "This represents kindness without expectation." Then she placed it back into Mason's hand. "And that is rarer than courage." For several seconds nobody moved. Then someone began applauding. One person, then another, then an entire section of the audience. Within moments, the hall filled with applause. Thousands of people stood. Officers, civilians, diplomats, engineers, cargo workers, security teams. Every corner of Orbital Nexus joined the ovation. Mason stared across the crowd in complete disbelief. He had not saved planets. He had not commanded fleets. He had not become a hero. He had simply treated someone with kindness. Yet somehow that simple act had traveled farther than he ever imagined. Beside him, Naira watched the audience with quiet satisfaction. Because the lesson had never been about her. It had never been about rank, power, or reputation. It was about something much simpler. Outside the station, stars stretched endlessly across the darkness. Inside, thousands of people celebrated a truth that often went unnoticed. Strength can earn admiration. Skill can earn respect. But kindness earns something far rarer. And as the applause echoed through Orbital Nexus, the station's greatest warrior smiled at the most ordinary man she had ever met, knowing that was exactly what made him extraordinary.